back, Buckeye Nation. It's time for the Silver Bullets podcast. I'm Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnich.
Chip, how are you?
I'm good. I'm enjoying. How does Urban Meyer say it? It's like, like the best thing about being, 9-1 is the opportunity to go 10-1 kind of a thing. I'm not. I'm grateful for the win. How's that?
All right. Did you go up to East Lansing?
I did not. I was working on. I watched the game. My best friend from high school has a cottage up near like the lakeside Marblehead area. For those people who are familiar with that geographic area of Ohio, it's near Sandusky. It's near Cedar Point. Mm-hmm. So a whole bunch of us, we always get together and winterize his place, which basically his place isn't that big. So I'm not going to lie. My wife it's not even, I don't even try to make it out to be, this is such tough work. I mean, she's been there, so she knows how much work actually is required. So it's basically after about an hour's worth of work, we sit around and then just drink beer, which led to watching the Ohio State-Michigan State game with a bunch of my close friends from high school.
Well, that sounds delightful.
It's no 70th wedding anniversary, I can tell you that much.
Well, thank God for that. All right, so Chip, Ohio State went to East Lansing, and because that's what the schedule told them that they had to do, and they come out of there with a 26-6 victory. Still a lot of hand wringing from the fan base, but then I will point out the fact that the Michigan State Spartans lost 21-7 against Michigan.
Yeah, I think if anything, this was. When we start looking at this game, there are a lot of good things you can look at it from the Ohio State perspective. There are still things that are concerning. I'm not going to lie, but overall, I like you said. I mean, there's no pleasing, some people. I'm just grateful for the win because I honestly thought it was going to be closer than it was for a long time of the game. It was a close game until kind of Michigan State started to self-destruct in the fourth quarter, which kind of led to that nice, comfortable margin of victory. But overall, to come out of East Lansing with a win, I'm very happy about it.
Well, I will say there were some things I did not expect. I did not expect to hold Sparty without a touchdown. I did not expect to have a 100-yard rusher against the number one rush defense in the country. Those were surprising to me. Anything else surprising to you?
Well, I would say probably Dwayne Haskins' performance was a little bit surprising in the sense that now that marks the second straight game where he wasn't superstar caliber. So maybe I've become spoiled, but it was just somewhat kind of puzzling that, Dwayne Haskins wasn't nearly at his best for the second week in a row.
We talked early in the season about how when the November winds start blowing, things might get a little more difficult. And it seems to be, I don't know how bad the weather was. I know it was chilly. I'm sure he wouldn't use it as an excuse. I thought that Michigan State had a pretty good game plan for the Ohio State receivers. I think that Dwayne was not helped out by his Zone 6 compatriots there because I don't think that they played particularly well in this game, especially catching the ball. I thought Johnny Dixon alone dropped enough passes to cost him the single-season passing yards mark in that game, and then I think he had a few other drops along the way as well. But it's a difficult opponent. It's on the road. You knew it was going to be an old-fashioned slobber knocker with Sparty. You knew that they were going to be up for the game. Mark D'Antonio likes to play Ohio State. He usually does a pretty good job getting his team ready for that particular game. And, it kind of bore out that way in the first quarter. No score after one. Ohio State had negative yards rushing in the first quarter, I think due to a couple sacks maybe. And, things business picked up a little bit in the second quarter.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you getting back to Dwayne Haskins. I think he was he was hurt by, as you said, I think a number of factors. I think you're spot on when you say like the zone 6. The drops were very disappointing. I think he was also hurt by the offensive line pass protection. This is another thing that was kind of falls under that concerning category. Is everyone knew going into this that Michigan State had a very capable defense, and the offensive line did not seem to, give Haskins ample protection. Now, granted, like I said, I think you got to give a lot of credit to Michigan State, but considering the opponents that Ohio State still has to play in the regular season, that's kind of a warning sign. And I'd say the third thing is, when it comes to Dwayne Haskins, is that I think the weather played a factor in the sense that the wind was blowing. It wasn't nearly as bad as it was 2 years ago when Ohio State was able to squeak out a 1-point win. But, I think that, you saw some of those passes sail. You saw some of them now, in terms of, I think the overall, the big picture, I think it was an acceptable game by Dwayne Haskins. But as you said, the thing, if there's anything to be positive about, something that you and I have long been harping on, is the commitment to the running game. And that is, yes, I realize we're going to talk about Mike Weber in much greater detail. But the fact that Ohio State, when they needed to run the ball, as you and I have been saying all this season, late in the game, Ohio State was able to do it. And I think it was because they had made a firm commitment at the beginning of the game to try and establish that run game against a very respected defensive opponent in Michigan State.
Yeah, it took a little bit of time to figure out how they could be successful. It looked like early on the Michigan State defensive ends were jumping inside of the tackles to try to snuff out that run up the middle between the tackles. Was very tough sledding. I think it took a while before Ohio State realized, hey, we can run outside, and they had some success there, especially Mike Weber. For some reason, I think Mike Weber does a better job of reading his blocks on the outside runs than J.K. Dobbins does. I think J.K. Dobbins has a sort of a natural tendency to try to cut up the field as soon as he can to get vertical, and I don't think that I think that he lacked the patience to have the success that Weber had, although I think that the plays were there for him to make as well.
Yeah, what I remember watching during the game, Mike Weber, when he would run, kind of, and I'm gonna struggle to articulate this well, so I apologize. But when he would be running, let's just say it doesn't matter, like running to the outside, and all of a sudden he could see that the hole had emerged, back on the inside. That kind of slowing down. For if you could picture kind of what I'm talking about, like Mike Weber, he would just kind of start chopping his feet, slowing down, and then cut back in and square his shoulders and would be able to run for positive yardage. Now, granted, in the first half, it was rough sledding. I'm not going to try to make it out to be anything more than, it was very, very difficult. But by the end of the game, that kind of approach that Mike Weber had, as I believe is evidenced by the fact that he was in the game and J.K. Dobbins was not, the coaching staff was going with the guy who seemed to have figured out the best way to attack that defense and was playing that much more physical style that I think a game like this demanded.
Yeah. So the first quarter, again, was a bit of a punt-a-palooza. I think Jim Tressel was having a ball, except for the first Ohio State punt, which went 4 yards. I think Drue Chrisman did a good job of bouncing back from the early setback. We'll get more into that in a bit. But the first couple of scoring chances were missed field goals. Matt Coughlin missed from 51. That was I believe, only his second miss of the season so far. And then Blake Hobbiel missed from 44. He was wide right. And it seemed like the first 2-3 points would win the game at that point. But Ohio State was able to put a drive together in the second quarter and go 11 plays, 55 yards in 11 plays. That seems like a lot of plays to go 55 yards in 4 minutes and 26 seconds. We got down to the red zone, which has been the dead zone for Ohio State much of the last few weeks, but we saw Tate Martell package in the game.
And here was a frustrating thing. Maybe I'm kind of on like a lone voice in the wilderness on this, but it seemed as though once Tate came in the game, that they were much more effective offensively, like you said, in the quote unquote dead zone, as you would refer to it, like that they were getting closer and closer. And then they pulled Tate out of the game, which just did not seem to make any sense. I realized that, like they probably thought, okay, well, that Dwayne can hand the ball off to J.K. Dobbins just as effectively as Tate. And J.K. Dobbins tried to launch himself from like the 5-yard line. Yeah. and came up. I appreciated the effort, although the result wasn't what anyone really wanted. Anyway, my point being is it seemed as though, okay, here we go again. We're just bogging down. Now, fortunately, it didn't turn out to be all for naught because Ohio State did come out with a touchdown during the second quarter.
Yeah, I don't think you're the lone voice in the wilderness on this. It's funny because what fans and bloggers and media have been saying for weeks and weeks, Ohio State is now doing, and it's successful. We called for maybe try some new players. Brendan White comes in and does well. Maybe try a Tate Martell in a run package in short yardage. They try it, it works well. We should all be coaching Ohio State, right?
I wouldn't mind having, it might be close to what I'm making from the ozone. It might be. I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't object to it. But yeah, I mean, I never understood if something, that old adage, taking Ohio State football out of the equation, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That kind of what seems so common sense. That's kind of why, again, I was with my friends. Now, granted, having, several alcoholic beverages, in us by that point, we did not say it as calmly and rationally as that, but it was just one of those things where we were all just kind of wondering why did they get away from what was working?
Yeah, so the first appearance of Tate Martell came at the Michigan State 6. He ran for 5 yards, and they took him out. The next play was the play we talked about, J.K. Dobbins launching himself from his own backfield and getting to the line of scrimmage. And then, of course, as a good power running Ohio State team does, a 1-yard touchdown pass to Paris Campbell.
And that's the kind of touchdown pass that I've read it in interviews with former Buckeye quarterback Troy Smith, where he always laments saying, that's considered a touchdown pass. You got to be you got to be kidding me. I would add that too. So, but yeah, I was grateful for the score because I agree with you. I think at that point it was looking like whoever is going to get any points, that might be all she wrote in terms of the scoreboard.
Yeah, so Ohio State takes the 7-0 lead, and Michigan State has only a minute 29 to go, haven't done anything the entire half. So, of course, Mark D'Antonio changes quarterbacks, and they come right down the field. Rocky Lombardi comes in, gives them a bit of a spark. He finds Cody White. We had... they talked about this quite a bit on the broadcast, the bailout technique of the defensive backs in coverage and how they were just getting picked apart doing that. They would just wait for the defensive back to turn his hips and bail out, and then they would cut that route off and hit the back shoulder throw, and boom, easy yards. And they were making quite a bit of hay on that. And Lombardi did a good job. He came in, and I will say this, Ohio State, one of the more disappointing parts of the game for me was the lack of a pass rush. They were not able to get to the Michigan State quarterback very often and put pressure on him. So they get down to the Ohio State 26, and Coughlin hits a 44-yard field goal in the final minute to make it 7-3. And that's the way it was at the half. Ohio State did a very poor job in terms of keeping timeouts. They used timeouts on successive plays at one point. Had they kept those timeouts, maybe they could have gotten into position to score in the next drive before they went to half. But they also knew they were getting the ball first to start the second half. So
that was one of the positives, actually, that I at that point was just that knowledge that after the half, let's see what Ohio State does, because knowing that they were going to get the ball at the beginning of the second half was like, okay, it was a disappointing end to the first. We're up 7-3, but let's see what Ohio State can do when they get the ball first in the second half.
Yeah. So the second half comes out, and Ohio State gets the ball. They were able to drive a bit, but the drive stalled, and Ohio State forced to punt, and Drue Chrisman was just bombing them down inside the 5, and it was really going to be a key factor in the game eventually. Now, Michigan State did eventually pull within 7-6 after a few changes of possession. Lombardi was able to bring them down the field again on a drive, and they went 8 plays, 74 yards to kick a field goal, make it 7-6. And things got, kind of interesting. It was a very tight game, as you mentioned, and kind of we expected a tight game, a very close game, but I think we expected a few more points in this game based on our final scores, unless we both thought that all the scoring would take place in the fourth quarter.
Well, I want to give credit in the sense that I had predicted 20-17. I will freely admit, now that the game is done, that, and this is going to sound harsh, being an Ohio State oriented podcast, but I realized going into this that Michigan State's defense was very tough, but I thought that's why they're going to be able to keep Ohio State, to a low scoring. Mm-hmm. And conversely, I knew that Michigan State's offense was struggling, but I also thought, they're going against a struggling Ohio State defense, which is why I thought they would be able to put up points. Little did I know that Michigan State's offense would truly define the term struggling in this contest, which kind of is reflected in the final score. But give credit to Drue Chrisman, because when we talk about him flipping the field, that's kind of what set the table for that dominant fourth quarter, third and fourth quarter by Ohio State, because they outscored Michigan State, down the home stretch of the third and fourth quarter.
Right. Now the Buckeyes, they got the ball, they had to punt. Michigan State gets the ball, they had to punt. Ohio State gets the ball, they had to punt again. And Michigan State, downed at their own 1-yard line. Just another tremendous punt, great punt coverage. The Gunners did a great job all day. And Michigan State starts at the 1, can't get anything going. And what did you make of the decision to snap the ball intentionally over the punter's head for an intentional safety at this point?
I'm sure Mark D'Antoni, I disagreed with it first and foremost. But I guess my logic there in disagreeing with it, and Mark D'Antonio, being a former Ohio State defensive coordinator under Tressel, somebody who he has Jim Tressel's nephew on his staff as a defensive coordinator, he truly understands the value of good field position. I guess I can respect the rationale that what if we punt it and it gets blocked and it winds up, being recovered for a touchdown. But by the same token, I saw nothing in what Michigan State was doing offensively at that point to justify putting yourself in a further hole. Now, granted, at the time it was only 3 points. So now you're down 9-6. Mm-hmm. But maybe he was thinking, we're going to scrap like hell. We're going to keep fighting. I've got a pretty reliable field goal kicker. Now, granted, like you said, Matt Coughlin, missed in the first half, but maybe he was thinking, if it comes down to another field goal, I have confidence in my field goal kicker and forcing overtime, and we'll just kind of we'll take our best shot there. I don't know. I was surprised by it. How were you thinking? What were you thinking about it?
When I first saw it, I didn't think it was intentional because the punter looked confused on the play. He was looking around like he wasn't sure what was going on. And they talked about it after the game about how the punter even asked, "Well, should I just try to catch it and step out? What should I?" Like he was confused as to why or what they were even doing. And I realized Michigan State is down 2 punters, but it's not like those punters were getting harassed earlier in the game from better field position. And yeah, if Ohio State comes after it, I mean, 2 things can happen. Actually, a number of things can happen, but usually what happens when you're kicking off the back line of your end zone is if it gets blocked, it's a safety anyway. It's going to go backward 9 times out of 10, right?
Correct.
So that's a safety anyway. Another thing that we've seen, I don't know how many times this year, is Ohio State has a tendency to hit the punter, and that's not good. And you're basically letting Ohio State off the hook there. You're saying, okay, well, we're afraid they're going to block a punt because they blocked one last week, what was that? Maybe the first or second one all year, and against how many roughing penalties? I would have taken my chances that they'd have roughed my kicker, but that's just me. But especially considering the fact that you never want to put yourself in a position where a score of a particular type, and in this case a field goal, would only tie the game. Before, a field goal would win the game. So
I again, like when we were watching it, it certainly at first initial viewing, it seemed like that had to be a mistake. But then, subsequently after the game, D'Antonio admitted that it was an intentional call. But yeah, I mean, he's the one who has to justify that to, his fans and his administration as to, why they did that. I agree with you. I think the strategy there, chances are of your punter possibly, getting hit by an Ohio State defender or it seemed higher than it being blocked. But it just, if anything, think about that punter, it just kind of speaks to how little confidence he had in not only the punter, but the protection that he was going to be giving that punter.
And maybe a little bit of respect to Dwayne Haskins. Don't want to give the ball to Ohio State on your own half of the field. So maybe there was a little bit of that into play. But it didn't really end up mattering because, as we all know, the ensuing kick was out of bounds. So Ohio State started at midfield anyway. And it didn't take long. Ohio State came down the field and actually didn't come down the field, but actually had to kick the ball, and downing it at the 2 this time. And then, the kind of play that you never can count on, especially from I think Michigan State's a pretty well-coached team, but you have a snap in the end zone that hits the guy in motion. And then the ball's loose, and Ohio State jumps on it, and Draymond Jones gets a touchdown.
And I think that one, now granted, it did go off the receiver in motion, but it certainly seemed as though throughout that game, and that play was no exception, that Michigan State was having issues with their center snaps throughout the game. And I mean, I think it was a combination of, all right, the snap was too early. It went off the player in motion. Rocky Lombardi was unable to fall on it. I mean, it just is kind of a comedy of errors there that kind of, the one thing that you were hoping to avoid, guess what? That's what, like you had hoped to avoid that on that previous series with Ohio State, and it still wound up costing you the same result.
Right. So Ohio State scores, and it's worth mentioning that was the 4th time Michigan State had put the ball on the ground on the day. They had fallen on the first 3 themselves. Ohio State finally gets on one, and it's 7 points, and it's 16-6 at this point. And based on the way Michigan State's offense was playing, you had to feel pretty good when it got to 16-6 in the fourth quarter. And then Ohio State was able to recover another fumble on the very next play, I believe it was a pitch play that went awry, and Ohio State fell on it. Jonathan Cooper made that recovery, and then Ohio State ends up getting a field goal to make it 19-6, and just another bunch of errors in this game. This time a false start penalty on Ohio State, kept Ohio State from being able to advance and bog down another drive. So, but at least it was 19-6 after the field goal, and again, now you're feeling pretty good that you can keep Michigan State from scoring 2 touchdowns for the rest of the game when they haven't even scored one to that point.
Like I said, I mean, the challenge I have with this entire game is I want to give credit to Ohio State for winning the game against a good defensive opponent in a traditionally difficult place like East Lansing. And oh, by the way, the temperatures are going to be, in the 30s. Okay, so it was not the most ideal spot or ideal location. Let me rephrase that. But when you start looking at it as objectively as you possibly can as an Ohio State fan, you have to really ask yourself how much of this was as a result of the great play by Ohio State, or let's face it, a lot of self-destructing errors by Michigan State. That to me is why it's very difficult for me to kind of say, oh yeah, like Ohio State has remedied all their woes.
Right. I think there was a fair amount of self-destructing on both sides. You mentioned, Michigan State having snap troubles. Michael Jordan had snap troubles in this game as well. He had a bad snap in the red zone where Ohio State was about to put the game away to Tate Martell, and of course what you have with a lot of times with lesser experienced quarterbacks is Tate tries to pick up the ball instead of just falling on it and taking the field goal, and Michigan State comes away with it. Lewerke came back out, threw an interception to Shaun Wade. Good to see Shaun Wade get an interception. And Ohio State was able to put the game away with another touchdown this time. Mike Weber getting rewarded for his day of work with a touchdown run. 26-6 is your final, Chip.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it stat-wise, I mean, we were talking about Rocky Lombardi coming in and kind of giving that spark. And, when you look at it, Rocky Lombardi had a long run of 47 yards. But I know you can't subtract that, but you take that out of the equation. The reality is, Michigan State, they couldn't run the ball on Ohio State with Ladarius Jefferson, with Brian Lewerke was in briefly for a time, Connor Hayward. I mean, they cannot run the ball. They only, even with that 47-yard run that Rocky Lombardi had earlier in the game, they only ran for 54 yards. Now, right. I know you're talking about sacks and how that's subtracted, and I'm not taking anything away from that. But it just kind of goes back to what we were saying, that offensively, Michigan State, they've got a lot of challenges, running the ball. Their quarterbacks are hurt. I'm not trying to make excuses for Michigan State. They are going to a bowl. I don't know how good of a bowl game, but they are going to a bowl. Yeah. They might even be going relatively close by. Just really depends on how they finish up their season. But yeah, I'm simply grateful for the fact that going into this game, not really knowing if Ohio State could run the ball the way that you and I have talked about it all season, like in November when it gets cold and the wind starts to howl, there's going to be times where you're going to need to be able to do that. And fortunately for Ohio State, they were committed to giving the ball to Mike Weber and J.K. Dobbins. Now, obviously, Weber was more productive on the ground, hence that's why he had more carries. Mm-hmm. But they were able to have, with Mike Weber, he went over 100 yards. He had 104 to be a little more precise. He averaged almost 5 yards a carry. It's the kind of game that, who cares about winning ugly, just win.
Yeah. And, you mentioned sack yardage. Ohio State didn't record a sack. So 54 yards rushing for Michigan State is a pretty legit, final tally. I thought Connor Hayward would play well, and he gained 1 net yard on the ground. Now, I will say Michigan State did not. They were not a patient team when it came to running the football. And I don't know if I'm a Spartan fan, waking up Sunday morning, I don't know that I'm feeling very good about the way my coaching staff called the game. I mean, Lewerke threw 28 passes, Lombardi threw 19, so they attempted 48 passes in the game. And I think they had 18 rushing plays.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Thank you for pointing out, that Ohio State didn't record a sack. I'm guessing that the negative yardage that Michigan State has been attributed by must have been on the fumble.
Yes.
Like you talked about, like the fumble pitch and those kind of things. I look at it like, all right, Ohio State in terms of like the total number of carries. They had, as a team, they had 45 carries. Dwayne Haskins, he threw the ball 39 times. So to me, that seems like a much better balance offensively for Ohio State. And earlier in the podcast, I said how Dwayne Haskins wasn't especially sharp, but we talked about Jim Tressel and his love of the punt. Another thing that Jim Tressel loved, especially when it came to quarterbacks, is taking care of the football. And Dwayne Haskins, some of his passes, some of them, like I said, were a little off, behind. Some of them he overthrew, and yes, he was victimized by drops. But in that all-important category, according to Jim Tressel, he took care of the football. He didn't throw any interceptions. So, all in all, the fact that Ohio State went into a notoriously difficult place and came out with a win and were able to run the ball when they needed to, I'm pleased with the result. Might have been ugly at times, but hey, I'll take it. And Ohio State's still in the hunt for the Big Ten East.
Absolutely, a workmanlike effort for the defense. Brendan White got the start this week, and he ended up with 5 tackles. Nobody had a huge day. Pete Werner led the team with 7 tackles, 4 solos, but not a big day in terms of tackles for loss. There were only 2. One by Tuff Borland was a 6-yard tackle for loss. He chased down a running play from behind, and Malik Harrison and Jonathan Cooper shared one for I think a loss of 1. So it was not like there weren't a lot of pushback plays, but there were a lot of very ineffective running plays right at the line of scrimmage. Lewerke ran the ball a few times, but more of, I think about at least half his runs were scrambles. Lombardi had the one long run, it kind of surprised me that they didn't come back to that more often. The quarterback run with the way that when Ohio State was in man coverage, everybody just turns their back to the line of scrimmage and runs away. So if you can find a hole, you can get a big gain, and obviously they did that once in the game. But it was nice to see Mike Weber go over 100 yards against a legitimate, run defense. Nobody really established themselves on the receiving end. There were a couple nice catches here and there. Chris Olave had 1 or 2 that I thought were good. KJ Hill, kind of a pedestrian, 6 catches, only 38 yards. Paris Campbell, similar stats, 6 catches, 42 yards. He had the 1-yard touchdown. Nobody really stood out in this game from Ohio State except Drue Chrisman, who had probably one of the worst plays in the game to start the game, and then he really redeemed himself. 6 times he dropped a punt inside the 20-yard line, and most of those were inside the 10 and a few inside the 5 as well. On 9 punts, he averaged 37.8 yards, which is not a lot of yards for him, but he got the job done because most of his punts were coming from about midfield and needed to be downed, and they were. So great job by Drue Chrisman, especially if you take the 4-yarder out of his average, it goes up significantly.
Somebody, I'm not sure, I want to give proper credit, but I can't recall. I read this online. They said something about how Drue Chrisman, his first punt was something that former President Abraham Lincoln would have appreciated, because it was 4 yards and 7 aisles up.
Yeah. I can't remember who that was, but that's a great line.
So the fact that sometimes that, those are the kind of plays that, depending on who the player is, they can let that mistake stay with them, and then they make a second and a third mistake and just let it kind of snowball into a lot of negative momentum. So major props to Drue Chrisman, because I don't think without Drue Chrisman's performance, Ohio State, I'm not saying that they wouldn't have won that game, but I don't think they would have won that game as convincingly as they did in the second half, because as you said, by pinning Michigan State deep repeatedly, it led to that safety. It led to that fumble that was recovered for a touchdown. All those things have a cumulative effect. So Drue Chrisman, and especially Terry McLaurin also, his reception tally, he had 5 receptions for 63 yards, but his play as a gunner was exceptional. He was the one who was making those plays that would put the ball on the 1 or the 2 yard line after Drue Chrisman had done such a great job punting the ball down there.
Right, and McLaurin also was one of the keys to those outside run success. McLaurin is blocking, as well as Luke Farrell, Rashad Berry. They were doing a good job of leading around the end and springing Mike Weber for some runs. And I think Johnny Dixon, also had a really good play as a gunner, if I'm not mistaken, in that game.
Yeah, I just know, no offense to Johnny Dixon, that today in his press conference, Urban Meyer said if he has another child that he would name him Terry, but he also did make a quick reference. He's like, I don't think that's going to happen. And Shelly Meyer quickly added on Twitter, no, that's not going to happen. But she was happy to see Urban was in a happy, joking mood at the press conference.
Yeah, Terry Meyer, huh? Got a nice ring to it. Drue Chrisman made me laugh when he said that he didn't even know there was a media room after the game.
Well, let's admit it. It's like you're usually not kind of the center of attention. It's kind of unusual. I thought that it might have been when listening to Tom Orr and Tony Gerdeman in their post-game analysis, the analogy to the Sugar Bowl, the 2015 Sugar Bowl, when Ohio State and Alabama played, how Alabama's punter was able to, in that game, was constantly pinning Ohio State back deep in their own territory. Fortunately for Ohio State, they came out on the winning end of that, but I thought that was a really good analogy of the performance that Drue Chrisman gave against Michigan State.
Yeah, we had a Zeke back then.
We did have a Zeke. That's
that
true.
So John Toma broke his self-imposed Twitter silence to thank Drue Chrisman for breaking his Ohio State record for shortest punt.
Well, hey, let's face it, all records are meant to be broken, right? So
what are the odds are that Drue Chrisman could end up with the shortest and longest punt in Ohio State history by the time his career is over?
That I never thought about it that way. Guess that's
something.
Yeah, it's just something to contemplate. I guess that's a good question to ask him. By the time, I'm not sure in terms of what kind of professional goals that Drue Chrisman certainly probably aspires to be a punter in the NFL someday. But that would be something to kind of hang your hat on. I hold the longest and shortest punt in Ohio State football history.
Now, he's going to have to do some work for that longest one. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but I remember Cameron Johnston had one that rolled forever and had something ridiculous, like a 78-yard punt or something like that. There's probably been one even longer than that at some point. But, great day for Drue Chrisman. Kind of BS that he wasn't Special Teams Player of the Week in the Big Ten, huh?
Wasn't just kind of. I think you're being very polite. It was, obviously the people that make these selections are not watching the game in their entirety. And I mean, we're going to be talking about Maryland here in a little bit. The fact that they gave it to, Indiana, okay, that's all fine and good, but I realize that was a game-winning field goal, and I'm not trying to minimize how difficult that is, especially in, under such clutch situations. But anyone who knows anything about college football could have objectively said that Drue Chrisman, his performance on Saturday, that warranted the special teams player of the week.
I would say so. I mean, I thought about this. I tried to think about it objectively, and that's before I knew what the punt average was. But of course, if you're not watching the games and you see his average, you go, it's kind of 38 yards. Really, that's it. But it was really not just downing them inside the 20. It was the downing them inside the 5, and a couple of them at the 1 and 2 yard lines that really allowed Ohio State to take control of that game, because Ohio State's defense was playing well. The Michigan State offense was not playing well, and just by having the ball in that situation, it was inevitable that at some point Michigan State was going to make a mistake, and it did, obviously. So kudos to Drue Chrisman. I think that he is, in everyone's minds, the actual Big Ten Special Teams Player of the Week. Indiana's kicker, I'm not trying to take anything away from the kid, but I mean, he made, a 42-yarder with a little, almost 3 minutes still on the clock. It's not like he hit, a 60-yarder as time expired or anything like that. It was, not the easiest kick probably, but 42 yards. You're a Division I kicker. You should be able to make a 42-yard field goal.
Yeah, I agree. I completely, like I said, I mean, you're preaching to the choir, man.
All right. Well, Chip, anything else you want to talk about in terms of Ohio State and Michigan State?
I just think we are. Let's just say that I think the cake has been baked, so to speak. Like, this team is pretty much like, all of the hand wringing and they need to do this and they need to change this. And I think this team, especially considering where we are in the season, what you see is what you get with this team. So, the challenges offensively, defensively, I think it's pretty much, this is what we're going to get, for better or for worse. So, any hopes or beliefs that, okay, there's going to be a mass upheaval in terms of personnel. I think Brendan White is going to be the biggest personnel change that Ohio State probably will see for the remainder of the season. So, congratulations to Ohio State on a hard-fought victory, 9-1. Still have a lot to play for, especially going into this week on the road at Maryland at noon.
Yeah, outstanding. I think overall, if you would have told me the final score on Friday night, I would have said, okay, cool. It was ugly. It was at times hard to watch, especially early in the game. And there were just a lot of times when Ohio State just seemed like if they just made one third down play that they could get on a roll, but they couldn't quite figure out how to do that. And I think some of the credit has to go to Michigan State. They did a really wonderful job of tugging the outside hip of the Ohio State receivers on slant patterns and not getting called for it. I was getting a little bit, I'm a grumpy old Buckeye, so that's what I was getting. I was getting a little bit grumpy about that. But I think overall, it just didn't seem like a great matchup for Ohio State. And you just hoped that Ohio State's defense could play well enough, and they did. They played well enough to get the victory, and it's really difficult to say how much progress this defense has made. But I think just the one explosion play was the quarterback run, as far as I can remember.
Yeah, you've got that right. I mean, they offensively, Michigan State had a lot of difficulty getting everything to gel. I mean, as you said, they couldn't throw the ball effectively. Their quarterbacks threw the ball 48 times. They couldn't run the ball. They only ran for 54 yards. Ohio State, give them a lot of credit for kind of gumming up the works on Michigan State offensively.
Michigan State, Chip, this one really stuck out to me. Only 3 minutes of possession in the fourth quarter. Ohio State 11:47.
And again, that goes back to what we've been hoping for, is that when you need to control that clock, Ohio State was up to the challenge, and Mike Weber especially. Now, they like his longest run of the day, Mike Weber, was 18 yards, but we've been lamenting, where are those long runs and this and that, like when Ohio State needed Mike Weber to come up big, the offensive line to come up big, control the clock, they were able to do it. So the fact I was not aware of that sheer dominance of time of possession by Ohio State or Michigan State.
Yeah. All right, so we turn our attention toward the second of 3 M schools in a row. Going to Maryland this week, Chip, and the Maryland Terrapins are 5-5. They don't inspire a lot of fear, but this is a team that I could conceivably see giving Ohio State some difficulty. Let me tell you why. The Terrapins, Chip, are 18th in the country in pass defense. That's not bad. They have 17 interceptions, 2 pick sixes this year. They've got 2 individuals with at least 4 interceptions. Linebacker Trey Watson, who's a senior, he has 5. And the wonderfully named Darnell Savage Jr., also a senior, he has 4. So this is a team that can cause problems for quarterbacks. They can turn you over and take it the other way. The other thing that Maryland does pretty well is also 18th in the country at running the football, 234.9 yards per game. This surprised me a little bit. I did not expect this. Maryland is outscoring its opponents on average, and I would not have expected that. I would have expected it to be the other way around, but Maryland is scoring 28.8 points a game and giving up 25.4 points a game. They rank 70th in scoring offense, 55th in scoring defense, which is not great. But it's always telling to me that if a 500 team is outscoring its opponents on average, that's usually a decent sign. Maryland is a team, Chip, that has had, like Ohio State, some off-the-field problems in the offseason. Of course, DJ Durkin famously suspended to start the season. Then Maryland decides go ahead and reinstate him, and then the uproar is such that the next day they fire him. It's just a bizarre season for Maryland.
Yeah, I freely admit, going into last week's game with Maryland at Indiana, considering everything that had transpired for Maryland, I anticipated Indiana winning that game much more convincingly than they did against Maryland. Now, I want to, like you said, I think Maryland is kind of much better than a 5-5 team. I think just the emotional roller coaster that they have been on has contributed to a number of these losses. I think when you think about just looking at the wins that they've had now, they beat Texas, they beat Bowling Green, they handled Minnesota much more convincingly than Ohio State did. Mm-hmm. They beat Minnesota 42-13. Now, by the same token, they were, looking at it like when they beat Rutgers, but Ohio State beat Rutgers much more convincingly. They lost to Michigan State 2 weeks ago, 24-3. So Ohio State just beat Michigan State. So it's like I said, it's that inconsistent, that roller coaster. I don't know what kind of team that Ohio State's going to be facing, because let's face it, every year since Maryland joined the Big Ten, Ohio State's pretty much had their way with them. But I don't know if Maryland, if considering this is their last home game of the season, if they're going to kind of, make their stand and play Ohio State tough, or are they just kind of mailing it in for the rest of the season?
Yeah. So I think you got to give a lot of credit to Matt Canada for keeping the team from quitting this season, because there was every reason for this group of athletes to, throw up their hands and say, woe is us. But they've fought pretty hard this year, and again, 5-5 is not great, but they've given some teams trouble that maybe you didn't expect them to give trouble. And like I said, I wouldn't have not have expected Maryland to be 18th in the country in rush offense. I wouldn't have expected them to be 18th in the country in pass defense. They got a few things they can hang their hat on, and the things that they're good at are things that Ohio State hasn't been particularly, or would be a particular thorn in Ohio State's side.
Yeah, I'm in terms of with Maryland, I think like the one player that I'm concerned about offensively, and he's a freshman.
Anthony McFarland, right?
You got it.
Yes.
You got it. Because when you look at the kind of games that he's been playing now, he's not that big. For those who haven't seen a lot of Maryland football, he's listed 5'8", 193 pounds, but he's coming off a huge game against Indiana. He carried the ball 29 times for 210 yards, averaged a little over 7 yards a carry. Now, he didn't score any touchdowns, but that's the kind of guy that I think, depending on what kind of Ohio State defense we see on Saturday, could really give Ohio State a lot of trouble.
Now, a lot of these little backs have given Ohio State trouble over the years, especially guys that, like, it always seems like Northwestern has a little back like that, right? Like a small guy that just kind of hides behind the offensive line, and then the next thing you know, he's by you. McFarland he's only averaging 72.5 yards a game, but he's averaging 7 yards a carry. So,
right.
I mean, he's getting it done as a freshman. They also have a senior, Ty Johnson, who's averaging over 7 yards a carry, and he's getting about 56 yards a game. But these guys, I think, combined only have 3 touchdowns. They're getting their touchdowns vultured by a couple of sophomores. Javon Leake and Tayon Fleet Davis have combined for 10 rushing touchdowns this year.
Yeah, if anything, this is going to be I think a terrific test for Ohio State defensively to see how well that they are able to, if not stop the Maryland running game, but slow it down substantially. Because like you said, that they do like to kind of farm out the carries, if you will, amongst all the backs. McFarland is the one who has the hot hand coming off that big game at Indiana. But if Ohio State, if they're struggling against Maryland running the ball, that kind of is a very kind of sinister forecast for what lies ahead in the final week of the regular season.
So what's going on with their stadium, Chip? Their stadium was Bird Stadium. Now it's Maryland Stadium.
I'm not really sure. I mean, if anything, I think, who's to say that, in terms of like maybe they're looking for like a nice corporate kind of, naming rights opportunity. I don't know.
Well, they did actually, because if you can believe Wikipedia, Bird Stadium was the naming rights were sold to Chevy Chase Bank, which was then acquired by Capital One, and then they removed the Bird Stadium name, and then they renamed it Maryland Stadium. So I don't know if Capital One didn't want to have their name on it, or if there was some kind of a conflict with a previous sponsorship that Capital One has, maybe. That they weren't able to put Capital One on it, so it is now Maryland Stadium. So for those of you who are used to Bird Stadium, it's the same place.
Okay, I mean,
don't get lost.
Okay, yeah, because it's. I mean, in terms of how big I've never been to the city. How many people fit in it? Because I know that was another thing that was kind of a concern when Maryland was added. Is we know you guys have a terrific basketball program. How big is your football stadium?
Yeah, the capacity's not giant. I think it holds about 55,000, something like that. So
okay.
It's not huge, but it's decent. I mean, heck, 55,000 would be as large as a lot of NFL stadiums.
That's true.
So, but it's going to be an interesting game again for the reasons I mentioned. This is going to be a tough test for Dwayne Haskins. He's coming off a couple of subpar games for him, not subpar necessarily college football quarterback games, but for Dwayne Haskins they are. And now he's going up against a defense that's very good against the pass, very opportunistic at taking the ball away. We've seen him be a little bit careless with the ball a few times the last few weeks. He threw a pick six against Purdue, obviously. But this is a chance for Dwayne Haskins, I'm sure, will have a lot of friends and family coming down to see this game because they're not too far away from where Maryland is.
Not only that, you're also talking about when it comes to Dwayne Haskins as well as Keandre Jones, they were both verbally committed to Maryland to play there, and then decided to, when Randy Edsall was fired before DJ Durkin came on, they decided to rescind their verbal commitments, and that's when they committed to Ohio State. So I think this is, like you said, I think this is a great opportunity for Haskins and Keandre Jones, even if Keandre Jones is just playing on special teams, for them to kind of show off in front of some of the people that probably watch them grow up and play in those nearby stadiums.
Yeah, no, I know. Like Haskins was born in New Jersey, but he went to school in Maryland, and I don't know how far College Park is from Potomac, but I know he's going to have a lot of family and friends at this game, and he's going to want to have a good showing. What do you think he's going to do, Chip, against this 18th ranked pass defense?
Here's my safest prediction of the season, and that is Dwayne Haskins will break the single season passing record against Maryland because he's only 50 yards out.
Yeah.
So I think for sure, even if he has a un-Dwayne Haskins-like game, I think without any hesitation, he'll own the single season passing record by the end of the first quarter. How's that?
That'd be nice because that would mean a good start for Ohio State if you can come out and get 50 yards in the first quarter. Do you think the last few games that Haskins has quieted the Haskins to turn pro after the season crowd?
It may have. I don't want to say that it's silenced, but I think it's kind of tamped down on, oh, you definitely have to go. Any of that kind of talk. I still believe he will go. I as of now, I believe that he will go. Mm-hmm. One of the things when it comes to the NFL draft is the idea of getting a draft projection grade from the NFL in December. And there's kind of that they'll say, you're definitely a first rounder. You're definitely like a day 2 pick, or you should go back to school. And I think by and large, looking at the college football landscape, I think Dwayne Haskins is the type who may think to himself, the receivers that I played with this year at Ohio State, the vast majority of them are going to the NFL. And offensively, I think I could wow a lot of people at the NFL Combine when it comes to the passing drills that they put people through at the Combine. So I think it's kind of quieted that, but it's not going to surprise me if he leaves after this season.
I would, if you were to put a gun to my head today, I think he's coming back.
Okay.
But it's easy to say now. Who knows how this season plays out? Anything could happen. There could be injuries. There could be a national championship. If everything just fell exactly right, there's a lot of different factors involved. But he's 21 years old. Again, he's things have been quiet the last few weeks. If he kind of goes the same way the next few weeks, I would not be surprised if he came back, and especially if Ohio State does lose the game. I think that would be something that he would not want to end his college career on. But obviously there are a lot of other factors involved when you have the talent that a Dwayne Haskins has. But I also wonder, what does that do for Tate Martell if Dwayne Haskins does come back?
Right. That's kind of when you think about like the big picture, is this in the best interest of the program for Dwayne Haskins to go? Because let's face it, offensively, Ohio State has been consistently inconsistent when it comes to their offensive performance. They started off, Dwayne Haskins started off spectacularly in the initial games, and then as the season has progressed, the running game regressed dramatically, and now we're at a point where we're trying to get the running game going, which is hurting Dwayne Haskins, and it just kind of makes you wonder, is it it truly the right fit for Dwayne Haskins, which was always kind of the secret question that people were, when they would look at that quarterback roster when Dwayne Haskins signed, is, one of these things is not like the other. You had JT Barrett, you had Joe Burrow, and then Tate Martell, and you were kind of like, okay, well, Dwayne Haskins is kind of the odd man out because his skill set doesn't really fit with the rest of the other quarterbacks that Ohio State's recruiting.
Yeah.
So I just think, I think if Dwayne Haskins, if he can play well down the stretch, I'm not even going to be so demanding as to, okay, you have to play this, like the caliber of games that you did, against Oregon State and Rutgers, where you were basically, flawless. But if you can play well, especially against a team like Michigan that has, tremendous defensive talent, that might be what convinces him to go off to the NFL.
Yeah, that's true. You just wonder. You got Tate Martell waiting in the wings, chomping at the bit to get his opportunity. You got Matthew Baldwin. You've got other commits. You've got guys that are still being recruited. I mean, there's quarterbacks on quarterbacks on quarterbacks in the pipeline, and you don't want to necessarily see Dwayne Haskins leave, but at the same time, you don't want him to hold up the pipeline either.
No. I think it's a difficult decision for the record, and this has nothing to do with Dwayne Haskins. I'm always of the opinion that regardless of the school, that quarterbacks by and large are always much better off if they do stay at the college level. And the case in point I always go back to is, when Peyton Manning shocked everybody by saying, I'm going to stay one more year. He, as his NFL career, when he was eventually taken number one and, obviously he's going to be in the Hall of Fame someday. He looks back on the fact that, okay, I had 4 years of starting experience, which was immensely important for my NFL success. And I just think quite commonly quarterbacks, when they give up years of eligibility, Dwayne Haskins, could potentially be a first round draft choice and get thrust into action right away. Sometimes it's actually not in their best interest because they haven't had enough snaps. Like somebody made the point the other day, Dwayne Haskins, as well as he played at the beginning and how he's played pretty much throughout this entire season, he's only started 10 games.
Yeah. And somebody brought up the other day, some of the top quarterbacks, young quarterbacks, got 30 starts in college.
Right. And I just think that kind of level of experience is what you need to draw upon, because the NFL, let's face it, I mean, it truly is. I mean, you're talking about something that's a job.
Yeah.
And there is no time to, okay, it's, now maybe Dwayne Haskins would thrive in that kind of an environment. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see.
So you're right. He's going to lose Dixon. He's going to lose McLaurin. He's going to lose Paris Campbell. He could lose Austin Mack and Benjamin Victor and KJ Hill if they decide to go pro. Out of those three, KJ Hill would be the likely one. Austin Mack, coming off an injury, might want to come back and improve his stock. Benjamin Victor, about 3 weeks ago, was looking like he might go early, and now he's kind of come back to earth. Some drops and some poor play in recent weeks. There's going to be some turnover there, but a lot of talent coming up behind those guys too. So I look forward to seeing how this plays out for Dwayne Haskins, how it plays out for Urban Meyer.
Yeah, I think the guy who I think I'm getting more and more excited about is Chris Olave. When I see him play, he had some couple receptions against Michigan State. So I think, I think the talent is there. It's just, getting it to mesh, regardless of whether it's Dwayne Haskins at the helm or Tate Martell. I think that's going to be the crucial thing in 2019.
Yeah, and as I mentioned on Twitter, Chris Olave is my favorite Ohio State wide receiver whose last name starts with OL, then has a single verb, and then ends in VE since Bobby Olive. So
we're going deep into the past, thinking about Bobby Olive.
Bobby Olive, yes, Chris Olave to Bobby Olive, or Bobby Olive to Chris Olave, actually, as the case would be. Anyway, we've babbled long enough, Chip. Give me your score prediction for Ohio State at the Maryland Terrapins. Should we fear the turtle on Saturday?
I think you should fear Maryland for all of the very astute reasons you rattled off earlier. But I do think that this Ohio State team, they're starting to figure some things out. I'm going to say this game it's going to be close until the fourth quarter. I think Maryland's going to cause some moments of frustration and irritation, just to kind of forewarn you for your grumpy old Buckeye column next week. But I think Ohio State comes out on top. I'm going to say Ohio State 35, Maryland 24.
Okay. We're thinking similarly again. By the way, the Maryland game is, I think, the third consecutive noon start.
And that's a positive from what I read online, that they don't lose. Ohio State, for all of my complaints about them coming out sluggish, they haven't lost at noon.
That's good, because the last two games of this regular season are at noon. So that will be 4 straight, which would be nice to finish the regular season on 4 straight wins, because that would put Ohio State in Indianapolis against the, obviously, like we all called it, the Northwestern Wildcats.
Precisely.
I'm going to say Ohio State 35 also, and Maryland 17. I think that this will be a pain in the neck game for the first half and maybe deep into the third quarter before Ohio State pulls away. I like Ohio State's running game of late. I think if they can run on Michigan State, they can run on Maryland. I think if you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball. And I think Ohio State is going to be okay in this game. They're getting ready for the rivals.
That's all we can ask.
Absolutely. So, so as mentioned, the big congratulations are in order to Northwestern Wildcats, who clinched a berth in the Big Ten championship game. They're, I believe, the 7th team to qualify to play in the game.
If anything, this is the first time I saw something online, and I couldn't believe it. I guess I could believe it, but the fact that this is the first time that neither Wisconsin nor Iowa have won the Big Ten West since going to this divisional format.
So when Nebraska went, was that Leaders Legends?
Yes, it was.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I actually was doing that. They said they were the 7th team, and I sat there in my mind. I was going, okay, the Michigan State, Ohio State. I was counting them out, and I figured them all out eventually. It took me a while to get to Iowa. I don't know why I forgot about Iowa, but that was the last one I got, because I was like, I'm not looking this up. I can do this, memory. You can do it, and I did. So, all right, Chip. Before we get out of here, I just want to say one thing that I brought up in my grumpy old Buckeye column, and that is that apparently, we now live in I believe the year is 2018. We have all kinds of technology, like we have video review at the touch of a button, and yet, Chip, why can't the referees spot a football properly? Why is this such a problem?
Because they don't fear the repercussions of the grumpy old Buckeye for not doing it properly. I don't know why I couldn't begin to tell you why they can't do it properly, because you know full well that every game the officials are reviewed. So unfortunately, as fans, those rebukes and adjustments are made, well after the fact, but it doesn't cancel out the fact that, as you are pointing out, the officials were doing a very poor job of spotting the ball when it was blatantly obvious where it should have been.
The one that killed me, and we'll talk about the forward progress one in a minute, but the one that killed me was, it was, I think, Michigan State lost a yard on first down, so second 11. They gain 10. The guy comes in and spots the ball shy of the line to make. Spots it. I mean, the guy comes in, marks it with his foot. This is where it is. And then, the camera pans around shows a player. They show the replay, blah, blah, blah. They come back. And Gus and Joel Klatt don't say a word, but it's 1st and 10. And I'm like, what? It was clearly third down. What happened? And they didn't even bat an eye.
like I said, I mean, it just, yeah. And the fact that wasn't made more of an issue is perplexing as well.
I really blame Ohio State's coaching staff for not paying attention. And I mean, I'm not necessarily saying you should challenge that because, I mean, are you really going to challenge early in a game for over 1 yard deep in when the other team has the ball deep in their own territory? Probably not. But those plays are supposed to be automatically looked at by a review staff that says, hey, wait a minute, that's not a first down. And
right.
You should take a look at that. And yet here we are in 2018 given 2 yards for nothing. And the referee, I mean, I don't know if they keep crews together in college like they do in other sports, but or in the NFL and in other sports have crews like at Major League Baseball and that kind of thing. But maybe I don't understand the forward progress rule, Chip, but that early 4th down when Michigan State decided to go for it and Lewerke did a quarterback sneak and then was stood up at the line of scrimmage for like 5 seconds and no whistles blew. What am I missing here?
No, I thought we're trying to protect the players and they kept it. Certainly did not seem like forward progress was happening at that point.
Yeah, I don't like the Bush push and all of that. I know you can now legally slam into your players from behind and move them forward, which used to be illegal, but now it's perfectly legal. And I mean, you can forget about kickoffs. That's going to kill somebody.
Yeah, well, fortunately, it just seems like it only happens against Ohio State. That in terms of like these, bad targeting calls, bad spots, all these kind of things.
All right, well, Chip, let's come back next week. Let's talk about Ohio State and Maryland and recap that game. And we will. Can you believe it already? We're going to be talking about the game.
I can believe it, but I don't want to, just because this every year, the anticipation for college football is, for at least for me, is it seems like it will never ever get here, and then when it finally does, it just seems like it sprints by.
It really does. They say time flies when you're having fun, and it's never more true than during the college football season. I got some good news and bad news for you, Chip. The good news is the Ohio State-Maryland game is an ABC game. The bad news is Ohio State-Michigan is a Fox game. Be prepared for a 7-hour game.
Well, I can only hope that we're going to get Gus Johnson again if it's a Fox game.
So Ohio State-Michigan, with all the commercials, should last us until kickoff of the 2019 season.
There you go. That'll sustain me.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think we're going to miss the playoff. It's going to be played while we're still going.
There you go.
All right. Okay. So Chip, the good folks that listen to this podcast, and they're out there somewhere. We have lots of them. They can ask us questions if they want to.
Yes, please do. I can be reached on Twitter at Chip Minnich. My last name is spelled Minnich. And like Michael, write for the Ozone under the Hazen Cannon area. And I also am a contributor to Athlon Sports.
Yes. So if you want to ask us anything, you can hit Chip up. You can hit me up on Twitter. Use the hashtag SBP mailbag. That stands for Silver Bullets Podcast mailbag, and we will read your question on the air. We'll answer it. We might even answer it correctly. Who knows?
We'll try.
Stranger things have happened. Please read the Grumpy Old Buckeye over at the Hazen Cannon section of the Ozone.net. Listen to all of our sister shows on the Ozone Radio Network. The formerly Across the Field is now the Buckeye Weekly Podcast, if I have that correct.
Yes, you do.
The Buckeye Sloopcast comes on, I believe, Monday and Friday.
Mm-hmm.
And Sons of Schmidt is on Thursday.
Yes.
And Buckeye Weekly is on Wednesday, and they also do the pregame and postgame show as well. So plenty to listen to on the Ozone Radio Network if you choose to listen to all of our sister shows. And please, leave us your star ratings and on iTunes and leave us some reviews. We'd love to have them.
Absolutely.
That'll do it, Chip. We'll be back next week. We'll talk about Maryland, and we will prepare for that team up north.
Can't wait.
All right. Until next week, everybody, go Bucks.
Go Bucks.